Stop. Please stop right now. The maid's scream tore through the mansion, sharp enough to silence every breath in the room. Because in that moment, a helpless baby was in danger, and the woman holding him wasn't a stranger or an enemy. She was the billionaire's fiancée. What she was about to do would shock everyone who witnessed it, and the truth behind it would change lives forever. If you enjoy powerful stories that expose hidden truths and unforgettable moments, take a second to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because this story will stay with you long after it ends. The baby's cry echoed off the marble walls, small and desperate, a sound that didn't belong in a house built on wealth and silence. Clara dropped to her knees in front of the nursery doorway, her hands shaking, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through her chest. She had worked in this house for over a decade, but she had never felt fear like this before. Not fear of losing her job, fear of losing a life. The woman standing near the crib was Evelyn Hart. Beautiful, elegant, and dangerously calm. She wore a diamond ring that cost more than Clara would earn in a lifetime. Yet her grip on the baby was cold and tight, like she was holding a problem instead of a child. Her eyes showed no panic, no mercy, only calculation. "He doesn't belong here," Evelyn said quietly, as if discussing a misplaced object. "And neither do you." Clara swallowed hard. She wasn't just a maid. She had raised the man who owned this mansion. She had watched Richard Hale grow from a lonely boy into one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. She knew his habits, his values, and the one thing he protected more than his fortune, his image. And that was exactly why this baby was in danger. No one was supposed to know the child existed. Not the media, not the investors, not the board members who trusted Richard's clean public life. The baby was born from a secret no one planned for, a mistake that threatened everything Evelyn was about to inherit. To her, this child wasn't innocent. He was evidence. Clara remembered the night she found him. A cold hallway, a faint cry, a tiny bundle wrapped in a thin blanket with a handwritten note that read, "Please keep him safe." Clara had lifted him into her arms and felt something shift inside her. She didn't know whose baby he was at first, but she knew one thing. Abandoning him would be unforgivable. From that night on, Clara fed him, rocked him, protected him. She became his shield in a house where silence was bought and secrets were buried. But when Evelyn discovered the truth, the air in the mansion changed. Her smiles turned sharp, her questions turned threatening, and her visits to the nursery grew more frequent. "You're crossing a line," Clara whispered, forcing herself to stand. "He's just a baby." Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. So were many problems before they ruined lives. The baby whimpered, his tiny fingers curling around Evelyn's finger without understanding the danger surrounding him. Clara stepped forward, ignoring the gasps of the other staff members frozen in fear. "If you do this," she said, her voice breaking but steady, "the truth will come out." Evelyn laughed softly. "And who would believe you?" she asked. "A maid's word against mine?" That question cut deeper than any threat. Clara knew how the world worked. Power spoke louder than truth. Money erased consequences. But she also knew something Evelyn didn't. Secrets never stayed buried forever. Just then, heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. The front doors opened. Richard Hale had returned home early. The room froze as his presence filled the doorway. He took in the scene in seconds. Clara on the floor, trembling. The staff frozen in silence. Evelyn holding a crying baby with rigid hands. His expression darkened. "What's going on here?" Richard asked. Evelyn turned quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing, darling. Just unnecessary drama." Clara looked up at him, tears streaking her face. This was her only chance. "Sir," she said quietly, "if I don't speak now, something terrible will happen." Richard's gaze dropped to the baby. The child had his eyes. In that moment, Richard knew his life was about to change, and that the woman he planned to marry was not who he thought she was. Richard didn't say a word at first. He stepped fully into the nursery, the soft light revealing the tension carved into everyone's faces. The baby's cry grew louder, echoing through the room like an alarm no one could shut off. Richard reached out instinctively, but Evelyn shifted her body slightly, blocking him. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, yet it told him everything. "Why is there a baby in my house?" Richard asked, his voice low, controlled, and dangerous. Evelyn let out a nervous laugh. You're overreacting. Clara has been emotionally attached. She's imagining threats that don't exist. Clara shook her head violently. That's not true, she said. Sir, she wanted the baby gone. Permanently. The word hung in the air like smoke. Richard's eyes snapped back to Evelyn. Is that true? For a split second, Evelyn hesitated. That pause cost her everything. You promised me, she snapped suddenly, dropping the sweet tone, that this wouldn't ruin us. This baby ruins everything. The room went silent. Richard took a step back, as if struck. Us, he repeated. You're talking about my child. Evelyn's face hardened. I'm talking about your empire. Your reputation. Our future. She looked down at the baby with frustration, not hatred, but something colder, calculation. People don't forgive scandals. They destroy them. Richard walked closer, slowly, never breaking eye contact. Give him to me. Evelyn tightened her grip. Richard, think. I am thinking, he said firmly. And I'm done listening to you. The baby reached out toward Richard, tiny hands stretching instinctively. That single gesture broke something inside him. Richard gently but forcefully took the child from Evelyn's arms. The moment the baby felt secure, his cries softened. He rested his head against Richard's chest, as if he belonged there. Evelyn stepped back, stunned. You're choosing this? She asked, her voice sharp. After everything? I'm choosing the truth, Richard said. Something you clearly don't value. Clara covered her mouth, tears streaming freely now. Tears of relief. She hadn't realized how close she had come to losing him. Richard turned to the staff. Everyone out. Now. They didn't hesitate. When the door closed, Evelyn's composure shattered. You have no idea what this will cost you, she said. The board will panic. Investors will run. The media will tear you apart. Richard looked at her calmly. Then you should leave before it happens. Her eyes widened. You can't just throw me out. I can, he replied. And I am. Security arrived minutes later. Evelyn protested, threatened lawsuits, screamed about betrayal, but it didn't matter anymore. Her voice faded down the hallway, replaced by an unfamiliar quiet, one that felt clean. Later that night, Richard sat alone in his study with the baby asleep in his arms. Clara stood nearby, unsure if she was still allowed to be there. Richard looked up at her. You saved him, he said quietly. Clara shook her head. I did what anyone should. No, Richard replied. You did what others were too afraid to do. The next morning, the story broke. Not the way Evelyn feared, but the way truth demanded. Richard Hale released a public statement acknowledging his child. He didn't hide. He didn't deny. He took responsibility. Headlines exploded. Opinions divided. Some praised his honesty. Others questioned his judgment. Stocks dipped briefly, then stabilized. What shocked people most wasn't the baby. It was the woman beside Richard at the press conference. Clara. She is family, Richard said when asked. And she always has been. From that day on, everything changed. The mansion became quieter, warmer. Clara moved out of the staff quarters into a sunlit room near the nursery. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was the child's guardian, his constant comfort. Richard spent evenings learning how to hold bottles, change diapers, and rock his son to sleep. Deals could wait. This couldn't. But danger hadn't disappeared. Evelyn wasn't finished. From the shadows, she watched. She spoke to lawyers. She whispered to reporters. She wanted revenge, not just on Richard, but on the woman who humiliated her in front of the world. And Clara felt it. Late one night, she stood by the nursery window, holding the baby close, sensing something coming. She didn't know what form it would take, only that truth had a price, and someone always tried to collect it. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the storm still building. And somewhere beyond the mansion gates, Evelyn Hart was preparing her next move. The first sign that trouble was coming arrived quietly, almost politely, like danger often does. A black envelope appeared on the front desk one morning with no return address, no fingerprints, no explanation. Clara found it while carrying the baby back from his morning feeding. Inside was a single photograph. It showed her walking through the garden with the baby in her arms. The timestamp was from the night before. Her hands began to shake. Clara didn't tell Richard right away. She had spent her whole life protecting others by staying quiet, and old habits die hard. But that night, when she couldn't sleep and kept checking the doors, she finally understood something terrifying. Evelyn hadn't just lost her position. She had lost control. And people like Evelyn never accepted that without retaliation. Richard noticed the change immediately. Clara jumped at small sounds. She kept the curtains drawn. She never left the baby alone, not even for a second. When he asked her what was wrong, she tried to smile, but he saw through it. "She's coming back, isn't she?" Richard asked. Clara hesitated, then handed him the photograph. Richard's jaw tightened. "I won't let her hurt you," he said. Or him. But Evelyn didn't attack directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, rumors began spreading online. Anonymous sources claimed Clara had manipulated Richard. Others questioned whether the baby was even his. Blogs and gossip channels ran wild stories about a scheming maid who had climbed her way into a billionaire's life. The comments were brutal. Clara stopped reading after someone wrote that the baby would be better off disappearing. That night, someone tried to break into the nursery. Security caught the intruder before he reached the door, but the message was clear. The baby was no longer just a secret. He was a target. Richard doubled security and moved Clara and the baby into a safe wing of the estate. But safety didn't feel real anymore. Every sound felt like a warning. Every shadow felt like eyes watching. Then the real blow came. A court notice. Evelyn was suing for custody. The claim was absurd, legally weak, and morally empty, but it didn't matter. The headlines exploded. Billionaire's ex-fiancée claims child endangerment. Caretaker under investigation. Clara felt the world closing in on her. During a private meeting, Richard's lawyers were blunt. The safest move, one said carefully, is to distance the child from her. Temporarily. Clara understood exactly what they meant. Leave. Disappear. Protect the baby by removing herself. That night, Clara packed a small bag. She didn't wake Richard. She kissed the baby's forehead gently, whispering apologies he couldn't understand. She believed leaving was the only way to keep him safe. But as she reached the gates, a familiar voice stopped her. "Don't." Richard stood there, eyes red, holding the baby. "She wants you gone," he said. "That's how she wins." Clara broke down. "I can't be the reason he gets hurt." "You're the reason he's alive," Richard replied. "And I won't let anyone erase that." The court battle that followed was vicious. Evelyn painted herself as a victim. She accused Clara of manipulation, emotional instability, even abuse. But something unexpected happened. Staff members came forward. Old employees, former nannies, people who had once been silent. They told the truth. They spoke about threats, control, and Evelyn's obsession with image over humanity. Clara testified last. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She spoke calmly about love, responsibility, and the moment she chose to protect a child who wasn't hers by blood, but was by heart. The judge listened carefully. The ruling was devastating for Evelyn. Full custody remained with Richard. A restraining order was issued. Evelyn was barred from any contact with the child or Clara. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Evelyn stood frozen, her perfect image shattered. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Richard shielded Clara and the baby as they walked past. For the first time in months, Clara felt like she could breathe. But peace doesn't arrive all at once. That night, Clara sat in the nursery, rocking the baby as moonlight spilled across the floor. She thought about how close she had come to losing everything, how silence had nearly destroyed them all. The baby looked up at her and smiled. And in that moment, Clara knew something deep in her soul. This child wasn't just saved. He was meant to change everything. Time didn't erase the fear overnight, but it softened its sharpest edges. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly the mansion began to feel like a home instead of a battlefield. The restraining order kept Evelyn physically distant, but her shadow lingered in the quiet moments, in the way Clara still checked locks twice and held the baby a little closer than necessary. The media storm eventually moved on, chasing the next scandal, the next broken illusion. Richard's business stabilized, stronger in some ways, because investors saw something they hadn't expected, a man willing to stand in the truth instead of hiding behind power. That honesty reshaped how the world viewed him, but more importantly, it reshaped how he viewed himself. Richard changed his schedule. He stopped traveling endlessly. He started coming home before sunset. Board meetings ended early, but bedtime stories never did. The baby, now growing stronger each day, learned the sound of Richard's footsteps and smiled whenever he entered the room. Clara watched these moments quietly, often from the doorway, feeling something unfamiliar settle into her chest. Peace. But peace is fragile when built on pain. One afternoon, a social worker arrived unannounced, claiming there had been an anonymous report questioning the baby's living conditions. Clara's heart dropped instantly. She knew exactly where it came from. Evelyn had found a way around the restraining order without breaking it directly. The inspection was thorough. Every room, every document, every routine. Clara answered questions calmly, though her hands trembled beneath the table. Richard remained firm, present, protective. By the end of the visit, the social worker closed her notebook and smiled softly. "This child is loved," she said. "Deeply." The case was closed on the spot. That night, Richard sat with Clara in the quiet living room after the baby fell asleep. "She'll never stop trying," Clara said quietly. "I know," Richard replied. "But neither will we." And then he did something that shocked her. He asked Clara to become the baby's legal guardian. Not a temporary role, not a symbolic title. Permanent. Protected by law. Equal. Clara couldn't speak. Tears rolled down her face as years of invisibility, fear, and silence finally broke. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because when everyone else was afraid," Richard said, "you stood up." The legal process took time, but it passed without resistance. Evelyn's influence was gone. Her credibility shattered. The court approved the guardianship unanimously. From that day on, Clara was no longer defined by her uniform or her job title. She was family. Evelyn watched it all from a distance, her name fading from headlines, her calls unanswered. In a final attempt to regain control, she leaked a distorted version of the story to a major outlet, hoping outrage would reignite. Instead, something unexpected happened. People didn't turn against Clara. They stood with her. Messages poured in. Letters. Emails. Stories from people who had been silenced, overlooked, underestimated. Clara became a symbol, not of scandal, but of courage. A woman who refused to let power crush innocence. One evening, as Clara pushed the baby's stroller through the garden, she realized she wasn't afraid anymore. The sun was warm. The air was quiet. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like a threat. But life wasn't finished testing her, because the child was growing older. And soon, he would start asking questions. Questions about his mother, about the woman who left him behind, about why Clara loved him the way she did. Clara knew that day would come, and when it did, she would tell him the truth, not about hate or betrayal, but about choice. About how love isn't always about blood, but about who stays when walking away would have been easier. She looked down at him as he slept peacefully in the stroller, unaware of the battles fought for his life. And she promised herself one thing. No matter what the future held, she would never let him feel unwanted again. Years passed quietly, the way healing often does. The mansion that once felt cold and guarded now echoed with laughter, small footsteps, and bedtime songs. The baby grew into a curious little boy with bright eyes and a gentle heart. He called Richard Dad. He called Clara Mama Clara. And to him, that was the only truth that mattered. Clara watched him grow with a mix of pride and disbelief. Sometimes she still expected someone to tell her it was all temporary, that she didn't belong here. But every morning proved her wrong. Every scraped knee she kissed. Every nightmare she soothed. Every smile that reached his eyes. This wasn't charity. This was motherhood in its purest form. Richard kept his promise. He didn't hide his son from the world, nor did he use him as a symbol. He raised him privately, carefully, making sure the boy knew kindness before privilege. "Money can protect you," Richard would say softly, "but character will define you." Clara made sure of the rest. She taught him empathy, respect, gratitude. She told him stories before bed, not fairy tales about princes, but real stories about standing up for others, about doing the right thing even when no one is watching. She never spoke Evelyn's name, not out of bitterness, but because some lessons didn't require villains. The day eventually came when the boy asked the question Clara had both feared and prepared for. "Why didn't my other mom stay?" Clara felt her heart pause, but she didn't lie. She knelt beside him, looked into his eyes, and spoke gently. "Sometimes adults make choices because they are afraid," she said. "But love is about staying. And I stayed." He nodded slowly, processing it in his own way, then wrapped his arms around her neck. "I'm glad you did." That night, Clara cried quietly for the first time in years, not from fear, but from release. Across town, Evelyn's world had grown small. The power she once controlled slipped away piece by piece. No invitations, no influence, just the echo of choices she couldn't undo. Occasionally, she saw photos online. The boy smiling, Richard standing proudly beside him, Clara always close. And for the first time, Evelyn understood the cost of choosing image over humanity. She never reached out again. On the boy's 10th birthday, the mansion filled with guests, not elites or investors, but teachers, neighbors, staff, and friends. People who mattered. As candles flickered on the cake, Richard raised a glass. "There was a day," he said, his voice steady, "when everything I built nearly blinded me to what was truly important. And there was a woman who risked everything to protect a child who couldn't protect himself." All eyes turned to Clara. "She reminded me," Richard continued, "that courage doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears humility. Sometimes it kneels on the floor and begs for a life." The boy looked up at Clara, smiling wide. "That's my mama." Applause filled the room, but Clara barely heard it. She was too busy holding on to the moment, the proof that love had won. Later that night, after the guests left and the house grew quiet, Clara stood by the nursery window one last time. Not out of fear anymore, but out of reflection. She thought about the night it all began, the crying baby, the cold hands, the moment she refused to stay silent. One choice, one voice, one life saved. And as the lights dimmed and the house settled into peaceful sleep, Clara knew something with absolute certainty. The world may never remember her name, but one child would remember her love forever. And that was more than enough.